Happy New Year. Let's just echo thanks to our colleagues for their support, to our staff who is so well represented here, led capably by our manager, and following Jay's lead, to my best and favorite advisor. Hi, Steve. Happy New Year. So as the calendar turns to 2017, I've been thinking a lot about optimism and hopefulness, and specifically on what terms they are still possible for the year ahead, and how to believe in the best of what we are collectively capable, while perhaps preparing ourselves for the consequences of the worst. And so I found helpful a year-end interview with the psychologist and writer Steven Pinker, who described a distinction drawn by an economist between complacent optimism, which is the feeling of a child waiting for a present, and conditional optimism, which is the feeling of a child who wants a treehouse and realizes that if he gets some wood and some nails and convinces a few other kids to help him, he can build one. I am not complacently optimistic about the future, Pinker went on to say. I am conditionally optimistic. And I myself am not starting 2017 with the complacent optimism with which we might greet an easy year. This will not be an easy year. Ahead are the budget pressures and needs of WMATA and of student population growth. Difficult and sometimes unpopular citing decisions to be made to ensure continued delivery of core services throughout the county, and a federal policy context that will make the work of county government and the lives of our residents more complicated in ways we do not yet fully anticipate. But conditional optimism, that's possible yet, that Arlington can and will be better than the national currents of pessimism or insularity. So, here are my commitments as a board member, and my call to action, if you will, for my fellow Arlingtonians. In the year ahead, we will work to ensure that Arlington is still a place and a home for all economic classes. We will work to demonstrate that we are still a place that is capable of empathy, even in the face of great resource pressures. And we will still be a county that models pluralism and democracy. During decades of rising inequality, Arlington has put a stake in the ground for economic diversity, for the idea that the best of civic society, access to recreation, excellent education, to access to fulfilling professional work and entrepreneurial purpose, that all of those things are not just for the wealthiest. That's a lofty promise. And to bring it into the next generation, that requires a relentless focus on a single, and some might say overused word around here, affordability. With market forces all trending the opposite way, affordability and the economic integration that it enables takes consistent work and clear vision. 2016 was a year of hard work, including, for example, the first test of a couple of principles in our affordable housing master plan, distribution and preservation. Quick action happened for nonprofit acquisition and preservation of affordable rental housing in Westover. We are not done with affordable rental housing. We are, in fact, not even done with affordable rental housing in Westover. But as we keep those efforts humming, this year I am aiming to turn some of our public focus to the issue of childcare affordability. For me, 2016 was a year of gathering information and perspectives from providers, experts, property owners, and parents. 2017 is a year to act. We have a range of policy options before us, including building on the permitting and economic development support to new providers, reducing our regulatory burden, particularly with regard to physical spaces in light of higher state standards for child care centers, and exploring ways to incent the creation of affordable spaces for child care uses in our planning policies. Working with our staff and the county manager, my goal is to have some initial guidance for consideration by my colleagues and our community as part of the fiscal 18 budget process. Similarly, on affordability, thanks to efforts of community leaders like Affordable Housing Solutions, the idea of missing middle housing, the forms like duplexes, small cottages, multiplexes that can add more affordable ownership options in lower density neighborhoods, that idea is now growing in popularity around the county, including in an excellent display in the lobby of this building. As our staff works this year on amendments to the accessory dwelling category of the zoning ordinance, I aim, and I know I do so along with my colleagues, to use those community conversations as a springboard to a larger discussion about how diverse housing forms can enable more ownership and socioeconomically diverse neighborhoods. With respect to resource pressure and facilities, our land use needs are great in this small county. I will say what keeps me up at night, however, is not whether we can find homes for a growing bus fleet, storage for snow vehicles, more seats for more students, recreational spaces that meet a wealth of needs. I am conditionally optimistic that this is not easy, but possible. Instead, what keeps me up is whether we can do that while maintaining our sense of Arlington as a whole, rather than just a balkanized collection of neighborhoods, lobby groups, causes. It's our job as county board members to set the tone and to create the structures for community mindedness. I'm very proud of the joint subcommittee of the school and county boards that Mr. Fazette and I stood up this past year with Barbara Cannonen and James Lander, who's joined us today, of the school board, and the countless, I know Mr. Lander can attest, the countless hours we spent on our very first job, which was painstakingly reviewing dozens of overly qualified resumes and applications to create a joint facilities advisory commission with members that were truly at large in the best sense of the word and representative of our diverse committee. It was a pleasure to appoint them tonight. And if those things were the tentpole initiatives, the Joint Subcommittee, the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission, I think this past year was one where we tried to live those values of collaboration and transparency and in small and occasionally painful ways. For example, the decision of the manager at the board's urging to go public with an unsolicited offer for a land exchange so that we could bring the community into that conversation from jump. And the work to merge county-side and school-side planning processes for the new elementary school at Thomas Jefferson and enable folks to learn from one another. There is much more to come from us as county board members in 2017 as we engage with the advice and support the new JFAC and as we make what I think is really an unprecedented number of facility siting and land acquisitions ahead for just 1 year. But this is not just about government and elected leaders. And so I hope that our advocates and residents will join me in my New Year's resolution to be more empathetic in these debates in 2017. May we all challenge ourselves to do a better job to see our neighbors and fellow Arlingtonians behind the land uses and facilities that may not be our top preference for our neighborhoods or for a given site. To not see, quote, bus parking, but rather the exhausted Columbia Pike professional who needs some relief from the standing room only overcrowded 16Y on her way home. To not see just baseball fences and bothersome lightings, but the squirming fifth grader who will learn self-discipline and teamwork on that field. To see not wasted empty space, but the senior citizen for whom fresh air and parks, open parks, are a prescription to treat isolation or chronic illness. This empathy does not mean that we will agree on the best use for parcels, or even that we won't fight to mitigate the impacts that we see on our neighborhoods, but I hope we can strive to create the kind of trust and mutual understanding that really will allow us to meet our siting needs more creatively, and above all, together. Speaking of trust, in 2017, I am especially committed to keeping Arlington a community that models the ideas of democratic participation, where diversity is not decorative, but truly informs policy and governance. Over the last year, our personal conversations, I think in particular with Arlington's new American communities, have led to action, to partnership for children, youth, and families forums on SROs, school resource officers, conversations I hosted with our public safety leadership on the distinction between immigration enforcement and local law enforcement, or to the access to driver's licenses resolution that Mr. Dorsey so capably led our board on. In 2016, we also saw new ways of outreach, including and particularly on social media, which were rewarded with new voices. I think there is no issue that reflected that better than our short-term rental or Airbnb deliberations, which brought renters in particular into the fold in a way they haven't been historically, and allowed us to re-advertise and shape a policy that addressed the concerns they raised to us. In the year ahead, I am committed to creating more fora for those who feel concern and worry about the rising national tides of discrimination, of threats of deportation, or of religious registries. We will have to do this in partnership with all levels of government, from our school board colleagues to our member of Congress, but it will be more important than ever to ensure that all members of our community feel not only heard, but safe here in Arlington. And 2017 will be a year to redouble our efforts to engage new voices in new ways. In my own outreach throughout this past year, I've heard often that serving on standing bodies is not the right avenue for every resident, and that many Arlingtonians are interested not only in immediate or one-off issues, but cross-cutting and big-picture issues. Working with our new Director of Communications and Public Engagement, I am looking forward to launching a series of coffees focused on those big-picture issues, targeting young Arlingtonians in particular, as well as exploring other models to tap the brainpower of Arlingtonians across different walks of life. There is no easy road ahead, but here we find ourselves, not just with the ability, but the imperative to aim higher in 2017, to not just protect what we value, but to advance it. And aiming higher requires us to see higher, to look what is possible yet, despite our challenges. I am looking forward to working and looking on the conditionally bright side of 2017 with you all.